Good morning. As always, I'm thankful for the opportunity to speak to you this morning, even though I found out about it yesterday afternoon. So I thank Bryan for sending me the text and asking me if I knew I had the lesson. So I hope you all pay attention this morning because there will be a test at the end. Actually, we have a decision to make. A letter has come to us recently from the county saying that a new ordinance is going into effect first of the year, limiting the number of people that can assemble to 10 or less. This will be enforced by the county sheriff and the police department in Salmon. And anyone caught assembling with greater than 10 people can be punished by fines and even jail time. What are you going to do? Will you pass that test? All of us as Christians are going to be tested. Servants of Christ will be tested. We are actually Satan's sole target. The question for you is, are you ready for the test? You know, at some point and in some way, all of us are going to be tested. In many different ways we are. We're going to spend some time this morning looking at some people in the Bible that were tested. Some of them passed the test, and some of them failed miserably. We're also going to take a little bit of time and look at how did God react to these characters in the Bible that failed the test. How did God react to those who passed the test? I'm a little reluctant to use the term characters because I think sometimes we tend to think of them as characters in a book or a movie, something like that. We need to keep in mind that the individuals we read about in the Bible, both the Old Testament and the New, they were real. These things that they went through were real. These are true accounts. So as we think about the test that we're going to face and the test that all of us as Christians face, I think we can take some things and learn from those who have failed and those who have succeeded, those who have passed the test in the past. Use it in our lives. As we look at Scripture, Romans 15:4 says, "These things were written for our learning, that we might have hope." It's paraphrasing, that's not the whole verse. So what are we learning? And why is it so important that we learn from Scriptures from those in the past? You know, I hope that we can learn from those who passed the test on what they did and how they stood up to a difficult test and many times and how God rewarded them. Hope we can learn from the mistakes of those who did not pass their test and how God reacted to that. Like I said, all of us are going to be tested at some degree, so it is important that we prepare. You know, as we look at society today and the changes that we see taking place in society, and if you ever turn on the news or turn on your radio, you hear it. Things are changing, whether it be from the mindset of individuals, whether you see it from leaders in our government. The events that have unfolded over the past several years, I believe Christians will be tested in significant ways. I would say it's fair to say in this country and in this state, we're not tested very much. Not like some that are around the world that are tested with death. Will they stand for truth? And the fact that we've not been tested in such difficult ways doesn't mean it won't happen. When we think about some of the challenges and changes that happen in our society, and the fact that those who stand on the side with Satan are so prevalent, and it seems like they are gaining momentum many times, I do think that it's possible that we will face significant tests, like those that we read about in the New Testament, the early church, and those that are in other countries today. We're going to look at some situations where some were persecuted in the New Testament church. There were many Christians who were put to death because of their stance for truth. And I think we can all understand they passed the test. If they were put to death for being a Christian, they passed the test, they got their reward. And we're going to look at some examples. like I said, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that that could happen. Maybe not in our lifetime, maybe not in this generation. But what about the next generation and the one after that? Maybe our test is, are we preparing that generation to be ready for such a test? You know, I think in some ways that we are tested today as Christians is many times we are made to feel alone. And I think probably all of us can think of a time where we were trying to stand for truth and we felt like we were maybe the only one. You know, whether it was in a school setting, whether it's in the workplace, and maybe we're trying to stand up for truth and explain why we believe what we do, and we're put down, we're persecuted in ways, not violently, but you know, we're put down, ostracized. Maybe we don't get the promotion because we are willing to stand for truth. Maybe we do feel like we're alone. Unfortunately, sometimes the test that we're given is not necessarily against those who we see as the enemy. You know, in today's account, we're going to look at some who were tested. Would they stand for truth against those who were seen as authority, who should have been standing with them? Those who were well respected by everyone around them. And they had to stand up against them. That was their test. That would be difficult, to stand against those who are well respected, those who are seen in positions of authority, even within the church. That would be a difficult test. Would you stand for truth even if it puts you up against those who are respected? If you would, turn with me over to Numbers chapter 13. You can stay here. We're going to be here most of the lesson this morning. Numbers chapter 13, verses 1 through 3. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a leader among them." So Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran, according to the command of the Lord, all of them men who were heads of the children of Israel. These were the leaders of their family, leaders of their tribe. They were well respected by those of their tribe. Those are the men that Moses chose to send into the land of Canaan, to spy out the land, to see if they could take it. You know, keep in mind, at this point, God has brought the children of Israel out of Egypt. He's brought them through some pretty difficult things. First, they got out of Egypt, and that took quite a few miracles in and of itself when we think about the plagues that struck Egypt so that Pharaoh would finally let them go. Then they escaped his armies and the chariots as they crossed the Red Sea. And God fed them, and He gave them water, supplied all of their needs. And they've witnessed all of these things, and God tells Moses, "Send these men and go spy out the land that I have promised you." Not just any men. Verse 3 says, the leaders of their family. Let's drop down and start reading in verse 17. Then Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said to them, "Go up in this way into the south and go up to the mountains and see what the land is like, and whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, few or many, whether the land that they dwell in is good or bad, whether the cities they inhabit are like camps or strongholds, whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are forests there or not. Be of good courage and bring some of the fruit of the land." Now the time was the season of the first ripe grapes. So they went up and spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin and far into Rehob, near the entrance of Hamath. And they went up and through the south and came to Hebron, Haman, Shishai, and Talmai. The descendants of Anak were there. Now Hebron was built 7 years before Zoar in Egypt. Then they came to the valley of Eshcol, And they cut down a branch with one cluster of grapes. They carried it between two of them on a pole. They also brought some of the pomegranates and figs, and the place was called the Valley of Eshcol because of the cluster which the men of Israel cut down there. And they returned from spying out the land after 40 days. Now they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. So they did as they were sent. They went and spied out the land. They saw that the land was great. They brought back fruit like Moses had told them. And if you can imagine one cluster of grapes that typically you could hold in the palm of your hand today, it took 2 men to carry it on a pole. It was so large. This is a fertile land, just as God had promised. Think about the courage that it must have taken to sneak in there and spy out this land. There's nearly 2 million people just across the river, the Israelites, waiting to come into this land. They probably didn't go unnoticed. The people that lived in the land of Canaan currently probably knew something was up. So it took a significant amount of courage to go in that land and move around, travel around that land, and not be found out. These men had that courage. Verse 27, Then they told him and said, "We went into the land where you sent us, and it truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit." Just like God had promised. Let's read 28 and 29, and here we see the beginning of the downfall. "Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there." The descendants of Anak were of the giants. "The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan." So here we see the beginning of the downfall. They lacked faith in what God promised when he said, "I'll give you the land. It's yours for the taking." These men failed the test. They let the fear of the things of this life, the fear of the world, change the course of their action. They feared the men. The land was full of men, some very strong, some very large. When we think about applying this to ourselves, can we let fear of something in this life keep us from following through with God's word? I think it happens from time to time when we fail the test. When we fear that, I might be ridiculed, I might be put down. So we just don't say anything. We don't stand for truth. Think about it. These men, if they'd have been found out in that land, they could have lost their lives. And when God said, "Go in and take the land," and they said, "We can't take it. They're too strong. They're too powerful. Their cities are too fortified." Keep in mind, they'd seen God's power over and over again, saving them. The time that I can't comprehend how they could not remember the Red Sea. Pharaoh's armies were right on their heels. That must have seen, and keep in mind, 2 million people with women and children were probably not moving very quickly. And you had chariots coming up behind you. You're going to be overtaken. And God protected them, and they forgot it already. Verse 30. Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it." Do you think that took much courage for Caleb to stand up in front of all the people? 10 of the men that had just went with him said, "It's not possible for us to take it." Well-respected men. And Caleb stands up and says, "Yes, we can." Publicly. Before the people and before Moses, he said, "No, we can take the land. Now, did Caleb just have that much confidence in their fighting ability? No, he was confident in God. God said it's ours. Let's go get it. Let's do it now. Caleb passed his test. But it gets worse for those who failed the test. Let's read verses 31 through 33. But the men who had gone up with them said, "We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they have the children of Israel, and they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, The land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. There we saw the giants, the descendants of Anak came from the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight." So they made up falsehood about the land to try to encourage the rest of the people not to make them go and take the land. So not only did they not put their trust in God, they even lied to the people. Not about the size of the men, because they did see large men and descendants of giants. Does this happen today? Do men give false reports to try to sway the crowd? The people believed the lie. They turned on Moses. They turned on Moses and Aaron and on God, turned their back on them as they failed this test. Even to the point where they wanted to return to Egypt. They thought that was better. Let's go back into slavery. Let's give up our freedom because we don't trust God enough to get us through this. We would rather go back to Egypt and become slaves once again. If we jump ahead in chapter 14, beginning in verse 5. Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of the children of Israel. But Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes, and they spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, The land we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into the land and give it to us, and the land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. So now Caleb and Joshua both speak up. And once again, they have both passed their test. They put their trust in God in the face of rejection by the other 10 and by the people. Once again, Joshua and now Caleb stand for truth. Do you think Joshua and Caleb felt alone? You know, Moses and Aaron also were on their side and were disappointed in the people. But standing before this multitude and the 10 who refuted what they were saying, do you think they felt alone? As I said, we may be called to stand for truth even when outnumbered, even when we truly are alone. We might be called to stand for truth even against those who are well respected. Will you pass that test? You know, it wasn't easy for them in verse 10. And all the congregation said to stone them with stones. Now the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle in the meeting before all the children of Israel. They were about to be stoned to death because they stood for truth. We don't face that today. It doesn't mean that day will never come, but we don't face it today. And yet sometimes we fail the test. We fall down for something much less. We don't want the persecution. We don't want the difficult or uncomfortable conversation. Joshua and Caleb didn't back down even though they were facing the possibility of death. So what was God's response? Let's look at verse 11 and 12. Then the Lord said to Moses, how long will these people reject me, and how long will they not believe me? With all the things which I have performed among them, I will strike them with the pestilence and disinherit them. I will make of you a nation greater and mightier than they. God's very angry with them, and rightfully so. They have rejected him. He's led them through all these things, out of Egypt, through the wilderness, and he's about to give them their reward. And they turn their back on him once again. I understand why God was angry. But we'd be foolish not to think that he isn't just as angry with us when we turn our back on him, when we fail our test. You know, Moses goes on and pleads for mercy for the people. But God said, I'll raise up another nation, another people. Basically, he decided these people don't deserve the reward anyway. So he took it from them. As we know, the story goes, they wander in the wilderness for another 40 years until that generation's gone. Those that turned their back on him. Now they don't, as we read through the account of the children of Israel, they continue to turn their back on him and reject him at different times before they finally do go in and take the land. God will not reward those who reject him. Let's read verses 22 and 23. Because all of these men have seen my glory and the signs which I did in Egypt in the wilderness, and have put me to the test now these 10 times, and have not heeded my voice, they certainly shall not see the land of which I swore to their fathers, nor shall any of those who rejected me see it. God will not give us the reward that we have been promised if we turn our back on him, if we reject him. Verse 24. But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit in him and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land where he went, and his descendants shall inherit it. God will reward those who pass the test, those who do not reject him, those who stand for truth. In verse 30, it says, except for Caleb, the son of Jephthah, and Joshua, the son of Nun, you shall by no means enter the land which I swore I would make you dwell in. You know, the lesson is easy to see, but sometimes harder to live. You know, when we're the one being tested, sometimes we fail the test. You know, if we back up to the analogy I gave you at the beginning, where the county was going to enact an ordinance that would limit the number that could gather to 10. I made that up. But did I? About 5 years ago, how many of us failed the test? I know where I attended, we received a letter from the health department stating that we could not gather. And for a period of time, we failed the test. We made correction, and we came back together like we should, like we needed to. And there were a lot of things that went into that decision of why we failed the test, and we justified them. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what this really is. Until we figure it out, maybe we should just play it safe. Along with the pressure from that government agency telling us we couldn't meet. We failed the test. I can tell you I would do things differently today. Even if it meant jail time, even if it meant fines, I would do things different today. And I know there were congregations all over this country that failed the test for a significant amount of time. The conclusion for today, God will protect and reward those who serve him. He will punish those who don't. You know, we may be called to stand for truth. We might be called to stand alone. We might be called to stand up against those who are in positions of authority, those who are well respected among the community, those who are well respected even within the church. We might be called to stand up for truth at some point in time. So my question for you today is, will you pass the test? Will you stand for truth even when it's difficult, even if there might be consequences? Joshua and Caleb stood for truth even though they faced possible death by stoning from the people who refused to stand for truth. It's going to take a strong faith to be able to stand up for truth in those situations. And I hope that each and every one of us are strengthening our faith each and every day. The only way we will do that is spending time in the Scripture. Not just here on Sunday morning and perhaps on Wednesday evening. That's not enough time to get to know God. Spend time in his word. Learn to love him like he loved us. We talked about in our class this morning that we can't outgive God. Well, we can't outlove God either, no matter how hard we try. But we need to try. So as we close this morning, I would encourage you, if you feel like there's weakness, ask for the brethren to help you. Ask for the prayers of the brethren to strengthen your faith so that you can stand up for that test when it comes, because it's going to come. Your turn will come. If you've not become a Christian, then you have opportunity this morning to take that first step and become one of his children, become one of the ones who will receive his reward. He's promised it. You know, he did eventually give it to the children of Israel as he promised, but not to that generation who failed the test. So if you have any need this morning, please make it known as we stand and sing.